It's no secret that people are fascinated by cheating scandals. The lies, the lust, and the drama would have anyone on the edge of their seat. But sometimes, infidelity crosses the line from deception to murder. These cases saw people not only destroy relationships, but end lives. From an office romance that ended in tears to bedroom antics not for the faint of heart, here are some of the deadliest affairs. It's November 2009, and Vicky Roberts lies dead in her home. She's been strangled with a dressing gown cord, and her husband of 5 months, Michael, is the one who did it. Even though he says it was a mistake, he has something to do, fast. While Vicky's murder made it clear that the marriage was having some issues, there had been trouble even before the two tied the knot. In November 2008, a year before the murder, Michael had begun an affair with a woman named Carrie Hall, who worked in the same phone shop as he did. Not only did this affair happen while he was dating his future wife, but even after.
Michael Roberts, on the other hand, was living a deceitful life. He had been seeing other women prior to the marriage. He was seeing other women during the marriage and having a number of affairs.
And Carrie wasn't the only one. 7 months before Vicky's death, he began dating another work colleague, Karen Wilson. The affair lasted well into his marriage, and Karen has since said that she thought he'd split up with his wife. While he was carrying on these two affairs, the 25-year-old started to get suspicious, and their relationship hit a rocky period. Vicky's friends would later say that while they were sleeping in separate rooms, she still wanted to work on the marriage. Now, despite her best efforts, she was dead. After killing his wife, Michael's first course of action was to dispose of her body. For this, he headed out to B&Q, a home goods store, to get duct tape and thermal sheets. He wrapped her body in the sheets, secured it with the tape, and then left her in their garage. His wife's body was out of view, but he wasn't out of the woods just yet. Vicky was an account director for Banner Chemicals and had friends and family. Someone would reach out to her and become suspicious when she didn't respond. Michael, a 26-year-old sales assistant at Phones For You, decided to cover his tracks by posing as his now-dead wife. Using her phone, he sent text messages to her friends to make it seem like she was alive and well, even going as far as calling Vicky's mom to ask what he should get his wife for Christmas. Michael told the victim's loved ones that she had gone to Bradford for business to buy himself some time. But that excuse could only last for so long. In a shocking twist, Michael joked about murder with one of his friends. When asked if he had killed her, he responded, "I don't think so. You wouldn't get a body in the boot of a Toyota MR2. Even with a crime on his hands, he seemed determined to keep up his affair as he had when Vicky was alive. Michael met up with his mistress Karen and took her out to a pub in North Wales for a meal, where eyewitnesses say that they were very affectionate. After their date, Michael made sure to buy refuse bags, car sponges, insulation, and duct tape to wrap up his wife's dead body at home. But there were only so many excuses he could give before people got suspicious, which they did. Vicky wasn't talking to friends on the phone and hadn't been seen for days. Eventually, the ruse fell apart. At this point, Michael panicked, creating a fake story of her abandoning their marriage for another man. He told Vicky's parents she had taken her passport and left their house, which led them to frantically call airports around England, trying to find out where she had gone. After trying and eventually failing to find their daughter, the victim's father called the police on December 3rd to report her missing. The first place investigators looked at was the home she shared with her husband, including the garage where Michael kept her body, which officers missed, so no arrests were made. The killer had escaped, but only for a short time. On the same day, 2 more officers came around to ask questions and take a look at the property. When they got to the garage, one of the cops asked Michael to show him what was under the duvet, and he did. To the cops' horror, it was Vicky Roberts' body, wrapped in cardboard and duct tape. The secret had been exposed. The officers immediately moved to arrest Michael, but he was able to escape the house on foot. Even with 2 policemen on his tail, he was able to disappear and escape arrest. While law enforcement were looking for him and investigating the murder, the local community was thrown into shock. Michael went to Liverpool and then Chester, where he planned to take his own life in a hotel room. He had even texted his lover, "I love you, Karen, now and for always." Instead, he took Karen shopping the next day. But what would lead to him getting caught was when he disguised himself in a scarf and baseball cap to see his friend Lavina Trolley. He waited outside a Phones for You store for her and took her into an alley to talk. He insisted that he didn't kill his wife on purpose and begged her to believe him. Lavin called law enforcement instead, and on December 6, 2009, 3 days after he fled his home, Michael was arrested for the murder of his wife. After Michael was arrested, detectives worked to piece together the secrets behind his marriage and how Vicky died. His version of events was that they had been playing a sex game that they were used to, and that her death was accidental. This was backed up after Carrie Hall, the first woman he was having an affair with, told authorities that Michael liked to apply pressure to her neck when they were intimate. It also turned out that the other co-workers at Phones for You knew about the affair between Michael, Karen, and Carrie, but didn't want to get involved by telling Vicky. Besides his affairs, the truth about how he deceived their friends and family by texting them from the victim's phone also came to light. While she lay decomposing in the garage, he led her friends on and sent her parents on a wild goose chase. Then there was his claim that he strangled Vicky with her dressing gown robe as part of intimacy, but the bruises on her neck indicated that she had been strangled with something else. Once the case got to court, it would be an argument of whether this was a bedroom session gone wrong or a husband who killed his wife as the truth of his affairs came to light. When Michael was tried for murder in September 2010, his legal team tried to convince the jury that the murder was a horrible accident. But it was hard to conjure up sympathy when he deceived Vicky for so long, left her to rot in the garage, deceived her loved ones, and even went shopping with his mistress afterwards. Judge Royce said in court, "You cheated on her and deceived her during your relationship before you married and throughout your short marriage. She deserved much better than you." It took the jury less than 4 hours to come back with a unanimous verdict: guilty. Michael was sentenced to a minimum of 17 years in prison for the murder of Vicky Roberts. Several people competing for the affection of one person can easily turn into a deadly affair, as we'll see in our next case. But it would remain unsolved for more than 2 decades.
Stephanie Lazarus appeared at Sherri Rasmussen's place of work at Glendale Adventist and told Sherri Rasmussen, "If I cannot have John, nobody can."
The early 1980s, UCLA students John Rutan and Stephanie Lazarus would occasionally get together. John had said that it was just them fooling around, but Stephanie took it very seriously, maybe even too seriously. She took photos of him while he slept and stole his clothes as souvenirs. They would hook up on and off after graduating, but John never asked for her to be his girlfriend. When he met Sherri Rasmussen, however, John was smitten, and very soon they were a couple. It didn't take long for the pair to be engaged either. Stephanie was heartbroken when she found out. She visited his house often, and even though John said to just ignore her, Stephanie began reaching out to Sherri, even telling her, "If I can't have John, no one else will." John eventually married Sherri, and you'd think Stephanie would take the hint and let it go. But, as they were about to learn, it would not be that simple. On the morning of February 24th, 1986, John left as usual. His wife, 29-year-old Sherri Rasmussen, was supposed to go to work as well, but said she would call in sick because she didn't want to give a motivational speech. It was all good and fine, but throughout the day, neighbors noticed several things that seemed strange. First, the garage door had been left open, even though there was no car inside. 2 gardeners working in the area also found a woman's purse and later gave it to one of the neighbors. In the early afternoon, a member of the cleaning staff in the condo thought she heard what sounded like a fight. As all this was going on, no one seemed to be able to reach Sherri. Both her husband and sister called, but she didn't answer. Eventually, John got home and noticed that his wife's BMW was missing. This was odd, because Sherri didn't say that she was going anywhere for that day. But when he stepped inside their condo, he was confronted with his worst nightmare. His wife of only a few months lay lifeless on the floor with 3 gunshot wounds. But what could have happened? Looking around the apartment, both John and the LAPD were able to put together a probable story. Sherri had wounds all over her body and had tried to reach the panic button, which suggested that she had struggled with the intruder. Furniture in the apartment had been toppled over, and whoever attacked the nurse had bitten her. Sherri's BMW was missing from the house, which led investigators to believe that it was a robbery gone wrong. The way they saw it, the 29-year-old walked in on someone trying to rob her, was killed, and her car was used to get away. They also considered that a burglary had been reported in the area a while before Sherri's murder, and those suspects also wielded a gun. While it might have seemed like a clear-cut case of a tragic burglary, some of Sherri's loved ones, and even the police, were suspicious. You see, a few things were off about the whole situation. On the surface, Sherri's death could be written off as a burglary. But when you look closer, a few things don't add up. First, the intruder, whoever they were, bit her. That is quite unusual, according to investigators, as most burglars are men. The average grown woman trying to commit a robbery can easily overpower a woman without resorting to biting her. There was also a lack of missing items. No jewelry or electronics were taken from the house, and even the BMW was later found with no clues of the thief. The only item that was moved from the house was John and Sherri's wedding certificate, which is not what a burglar would typically go after. This brought up the possibility that maybe Sherri was killed for motives that weren't financial at all. But if money wasn't the motivation, what could it be? The burglary theory had already yielded no definitive suspects, so it would be even harder to find one now. Luckily, Sherri's father, Nels Rasmussen, had a suspect in mind, and quickly told the police about it. When the lead detective on the case, Lyle Mayer, began investigating the murder of Sherri Rasmussen, he had few leads to go off on. The detective didn't believe that the nurse's husband had been the killer, but seemed even more skeptical about the suspect the victim's father had in mind. According to Nels Rasmussen, a possible suspect was a woman named Stephanie Eileen Lazarus, who so happened to be an LAPD officer herself. His argument was that Stephanie had a history with Sherri's husband and had been harassing his daughter before her murder. Detective Mayer didn't buy this theory, and according to John Rutan, didn't even mention it to him as a possibility. The department continued to pursue the burglary angle, even offering a reward for any information that would lead the suspect to being found. Nothing came out of it, and as time went on, the case grew cold. This was despite the fact that Sherri's father wrote with the chief of the LAPD, offered to pay for DNA testing of the samples recovered from the bite wound, and kept calling the police force. While the Stephanie Lazarus angle seemed unlikely at first, even John at one point wondered whether there was any truth to it and asked the detective. It's worth remembering that this all happened in the 1980s, when Los Angeles was very crime-ridden, and the LAPD were up to their necks in cases. This meant that Sherri's murder wasn't a priority, even though her parents kept pressing. Soon, the case fell through the cracks like hundreds of others and didn't get any more attention until 2009. By 2009, both the Sherri Rasmussen case and those connected to it had gone through many changes. In the 23-plus years, John and Stephanie had married other people and started families. In fact, Stephanie had moved up the career ladder and is now a respected detective in the Commercial Crimes Division. The detective who was first assigned to Sherri's case had retired, and the department began working through its backlog of cold cases. The two new detectives, Jim Nuttall and Pete Barba, began working through a list of suspects, which included Stephanie. They'd also debunked the theory of Sherri being murdered by a burglar. Her jewelry wasn't stolen, which would have been the case. VCR equipment in her house had been arranged after the shooting to make it look like a burglary, and the shooter had even used a duvet to muffle the sound of the gunshots. When the DNA from the crime scene had been tested, it came out that the suspect they were looking for was indeed female. Looking through the previous case files, they were able to come up with 5 names. Still, Stephanie was considered the least likely because her relationship with John had ended well before the murder. So the detectives got to work and, little by little, began eliminating different women from the list until it was just Stephanie left. Now, investigating a top-ranked LAPD detective for a murder case from the 1980s was not an easy task. To avoid the word getting out, Nuttall and Barba only referred to Stephanie as number 5 and told no one what they were doing. Soon, the pieces began to fall into place. LAPD officers in the 1980s were allowed to have .38 caliber guns as their backup weapon, and this was the type that Stephanie had. The same type that was used to kill Sherri. Roughly 2 weeks after Sherri died, Stephanie reported her gun stolen to a different department, and this only added to their suspicions. A further look into her work history showed that she had been off during the time of the murder. Because Stephanie was an officer, she would have known to use her backup gun to commit the crime and to frame the scene to look like a burglary. Nuttall and Barba had come up with a plausible backstory, but now they needed to confirm once and for all if Stephanie was the killer. With the permission of their superiors, they collected a cup that Stephanie had drank from and tested her DNA. It came back a match, with the DNA collected from Sherri's bite wound. Stephanie was the killer. Arresting Stephanie was like a scene out of an action movie. Her superiors colluded to invite her to the then LAPD headquarters about a fake art theft case so that she would surrender her badge and gun.
Was there ever any relationship or anything that developed between you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we dated, you know, I mean, what's this all about?
When she sat down in the interrogation room, they revealed that it was really about the Sherri Rasmussen murder. After Stephanie was asked for a DNA sample, she tried to leave, but was arrested. While this was going on, police officers raided her house and car, finding diaries from the 1980s where she talked about how much she loved John Rutan and was upset that he was marrying Sherri. It seems she made good on her promise, and while she got away with it for over 20 years, was having her day in court. Stephanie's 2012 court case was an absolute media storm. A 20-year-old murder being solved as a love triangle with a scorned woman was fascinating to viewers. But at the center of it were families in pain. John Rutan took the stand when he tearfully admitted cheating on Sherri with Stephanie once. Stephanie's lawyers initially tried to have the case dismissed, on grounds of the evidence being possibly contaminated over the 23-year period, and the possibility that someone else's gun was used. In the end, a jury of 8 women and 4 men found Stephanie guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing her to 27 years to life in prison. She is currently serving at the California Institution for Women in Corona and became eligible for parole in 2024. Stephanie Lazarus shows just how far some will go to eliminate a romantic rival. She said that if she couldn't have her lover, no one else would. The same can be said for the next case on our list. Keon Pittman was a school teacher at Chastain Middle School and basketball coach who was in a loving relationship with Avis Banks. The two were like any other couple. He taught at Chastain Middle School in Jackson, Mississippi, and she was a daycare worker. But beneath this perfect exterior, Keon was hiding a dark secret: Carla Hughes. Carla taught at the same school as Keon, and even though she knew he had a girlfriend, she carried on. The truth was that Carla was deeply infatuated with Keon. When they were with his friends and family, Carla would refer to Keon as her future husband, even though he had a fiancée. Keon also never hid the fact that he wasn't going to leave Avis to be with Carla. Even when Carla thought that she might be pregnant, he wasn't budging. Carla was so upset that she actually planned to tell Avis about the affair. She had been driving to their house when Keon stopped her by threatening to call the police. Perhaps if he had, the situation would not have escalated. Keon came home on the night of November 29th, 2006, to his fiancée. At the time, she was 5 months pregnant with their child, and they were looking forward to starting their family. Once Keon came into the garage of the house, he found that their dream of a happy life had been shattered. Avis lay dead, having been both shot and stabbed by an unknown intruder. It was a shocking scene. After all, he'd seen her just that morning, and even though she hadn't answered the phone when he tried to call her earlier, nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. Keon tried to revive his fiancée and checked the house for an intruder, but no one was there. He ran to a neighbor who called 911, and while the paramedics tried their best, she could not be saved. Later on, the mother-to-be's autopsy would show that she had endured 4 shootings from a .38 caliber gun, 3 stabbings, and a slashing. As a result of her horrific injuries and death, the baby boy she had been carrying also passed away. With a murdered woman and a baby on their hands, the authorities rushed to investigate and made some curious discoveries. They initially suspected a robbery gone wrong, but nothing had been taken, so this was ruled out. They also found out that the door had been kicked in with shoe marks on the glass exterior. After collecting both blood samples and the shoe prints in the home, they got to work trying to narrow down a list of possible suspects. While the partner of the victim is usually considered, Keon's cell phone records and eyewitness accounts showed that he wasn't anywhere near the house when the murder took place. But if he didn't do it, perhaps someone else who was connected to the couple was responsible. Police began to look into Keon's life at Chastain Middle School, and soon uncovered a web of lies and scandal. According to his co-workers, Keon wasn't exactly faithful to Avis while she was alive. In fact, he was known to have several girlfriends on the side, including Carla Hughes, who was a fellow teacher. They questioned Carla, and she denied that she and Keon were anything other than friends and co-workers.
He's not a boyfriend, he's a friend. No doubt. There's nothing sexual with him. Nothing. No, nothing.
But after being invited for a second interview with the cops, she finally told the truth. She and Keon were indeed seeing each other, even though she knew about Avis. At the same time, she argued that this didn't make her a killer because she didn't have any firearms. But before she could breathe a sigh of relief, yet another piece of evidence came to light, this time from Keon's cousin, Patrick Nash. In fact, Patrick told the authorities that on November 26th, 2 days before the murder, Carla had asked to borrow his gun. The teacher said that she was worried about someone breaking into her home and wanted to protect herself. The gun she eventually borrowed? A .38 caliber. The same type of gun that Avis was killed with. Besides the gun, Patrick also loaned her a 3.5 to 4 inches long folding hunting knife, which is curious considering the fact that Avis was stabbed as well as shot. This revelation not only puts Carla under the spotlight, but could also be the key to nailing Avis's killer. The police now knew that Carla had possession of a gun and knife around the time that Avis was killed. But they still needed definitive proof that would tie her to the murder. When Carla borrowed the .38 caliber from Keon's cousin, there were 5 bullets in it, and Patrick mentioned that he didn't give her any spares. On December 1st, 2006, Carla returned the gun to Patrick, but it was empty of all its bullets. She also neglected to return the knife she had been given. 4 days later, she turned the gun over to the authorities, and a day after that, she was arrested and charged with being an accessory to the murder after the fact. While she was in custody, authorities got a warrant to search her house and find more evidence. What they found were a pair of her shoes to compare prints to the crime scene, a picture of Keon on a nightstand, and a handwritten poem she wrote for him. These proved that she was certainly obsessed with Keon, but did they make her a murderer? First, there were the shoes. The sole thread pattern from the shoe taken from Carla's house was compared to those at the crime scene, and they were a match. Then there was the literal smoking gun. The projectiles from the gun that Carla borrowed were compared to the projectiles retrieved from Avis's body, and again were a match. Her cell phone records were also reviewed, and it turns out that she had taken and made a call within the vicinity of Keon and Avis's house within the hour that Avis was killed, placing her near the scene of the crime. With all this evidence collected, Carla's charges were upgraded from accessory to murder after the fact to 2 counts of capital murder. Even though she had only directly killed Avis, the fact that her unborn child died because of her actions led to a second murder count in the state of Mississippi. Now that she had been charged, Carla was about to face a dramatic and heartbreaking trial. The prosecution already had ample evidence to pursue a case against Carla, but the trial still led to some shocking revelations. First, Keon's uncle, James Nash, revealed that he had asked Carla outright if the gun his nephew lent her had been used in Avis's murder. In response, she had kind of dropped her head and shrugged her shoulders, and I took that to be "I really don't know" or affirmative. The court also got to hear firsthand how much of an obsession she had with Keon. Even though this was clearly an affair turned toxic, Keon didn't fully disentangle himself from Carla. He actually went by her house on the day his fiancée was killed to drop off groceries for her. What had started out as a workplace romance had led to the death of both Avis and her unborn son, and now a jury was left to decide Carla's fate. While she did not take the stand to defend herself, several of her loved ones pleaded for mercy. Her adopted father, Carl Hughes, told the judge, "Carla has been a kind, loving person all her life.
I'm not asking you, I'm pleading with you to spare my daughter's life."
Her pastor also spoke about her character and said that she had volunteered at both the church and at the school she taught at. Her defense even turned their attention to Keon himself at one point. He was painted as a player who had affairs with several people and even suggested that he was connected to the crime. As the court heard the testimonies, Madison County Deputy District Attorney John Empfinger told them not to think about Carla's volunteering, achievements, or reputation in the community, but to simply consider what she had done. When that door opened, Avis Banks was not met by a beauty pageant winner. She was not met by a member of the Mayor's Youth Council. She was not met by a peacemaker. She was met by a stone-cold killer, he said. In the end, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty on 2 counts of capital murder. The punishment would be 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served at the Mississippi Department of Corrections. It took the jury 8 hours of deliberation before they reached this verdict, and while 2 life sentences is a harsh punishment, things could have gone much worse for Carla. In the state of Mississippi, the death penalty is considered in the case of murder, and the fact that Carla had taken 2 lives was considered. Ultimately, the same jury chose to decline the death penalty and offer life imprisonment instead, even though the prosecution pushed for it. Even after this verdict, Carla and her legal team still tried to push for a different outcome. In August 2010, she requested a new trial. Her lawyers claimed that the jury had been biased towards her because she didn't take the stand to defend herself. A judge disagreed and declined to give her the new trial she asked for. Their next move was to approach the Mississippi Supreme Court, alleging 6 different issues in the first trial, including the admission of the DNA evidence from Carla's shoes. The Supreme Court, however, upheld the ruling. Carla has not tried to fight the verdict since then and is serving her life sentence. Keon's workplace romance might have started out as harmless fun, but led to him losing both his future wife and the only son they would have shared. On top of this, Carla Hughes' life was cut short by her act of obsession. Meet Diane Zamora and David Graham, who first met in Crowley, Texas when they were just 14. From the beginning, the pair had a lot in common. They lived in the same area and both wanted to take to the skies. Diane as an astronaut and David as a pilot. This ambition paid off, and by the time they began dating in 1995, they were both honor students at their respective high schools, Crowley and Mansfield High School. 2 high achievers with big goals for their futures. It was a match made in heaven. They were so perfect for each other, in fact, that they got engaged and planned to get married after college. It was a young, intense love. So intense, actually, that some people were reportedly concerned about how obsessed they were with each other. David would always have his arm around Diane and didn't even want her family members to hug her. Others have said that Diane was the obsessive one, and that her life revolved around David. But no matter how obsessed a teenage couple are with each other, there are bound to be a few bumps in the road. Diane and David's issues partially stemmed from the fact that they went to different schools and that he was meeting other girls. One of these girls was Adrianne Jones, a sophomore at his high school. Adrianne was smart, having been an honor student at her school, but was also very popular. She was on the track team, was very attractive, and was liked by all. This included David, who got to know her better during a track meet in Lubbock. When David was returning from the meet, he gave Adrianne a ride home. Allegedly, they took a detour and parked near an elementary school. It was then that the two allegedly slept together, even though David had a girlfriend at the time. Afterwards, he dropped her off at her house and went to Diane's place. She would later say that he came with a stuffed animal and had this look in his eyes that was horrible. He looked so scared. This night would be a major turning point in all 3 of their lives for the worse. A month after the track meet, tension was bubbling under the surface of David and Diane's relationship. On the one hand, he says he was starting to feel guilty about betraying his girlfriend. Diane, who didn't see David during school hours, asked him if he was interested in anyone else. This all came to a head when David was trying to get his girlfriend to study for the SATs. They got into a fight, as teenagers do, and began saying hurtful things to each other. David threw it in her face that he'd slept with Adrianne, and Diane's reaction was terrifying. She started screaming and banging her head against the floor, shouting, kill her," at David. She was asking him to take the life of his fellow student to make up for what he had done. In a later statement, David would say, "When this precious relationship we had was damaged by my thoughtless actions, the only thing that could satisfy her womanly vengeance was the life of the one that had, for an instant, taken her place." It was a horrible request, but David and Diane had shown at this point that they were crazy enough about each other to do anything, even murder. On December 3rd, 1995, David called Adrianne's house and convinced her to break her curfew and sneak out to see him. They got in his car and began driving near Grand Prairie. Little did Adrianne know that David and Diane had concocted a plan to end her life. According to their confessions, the plan was that Diane would hide in the hatchback of the car and then suddenly spring out and snap Adrianne's neck. But that wasn't all. They intended to violate her corpse and then throw it into the river with weights attached. Things, however, didn't pan out quite as they had hoped. When Diane popped out of the hatchback, she demanded to know whether or not they had truly slept together, to which Adrianne reportedly confirmed that they had. But rather than effortlessly snapping her neck, Diane found herself struggling with Adrianne, ultimately hitting her in the head with the weights they planned to drown her with. Despite being injured, Adrianne was able to get out of the car and ran into a field. David panicked. The 17-year-old and his girlfriend had just tried to kill someone, and if she escaped, their lives would be ruined. He grabbed his 9mm handgun, ran after her, and shot her twice in the head. Rather than drowning her like they planned, the murderous duo left Adrianne's body in the field and went back to the car, saying, "I love you." David even said at one point, "I don't know. I can't believe we just did that." To cover their tracks, they cleaned the car, disposed of their bloody clothes, and went home. In her calendar, Diane wrote Adrianne 01:38 a.m. to commemorate her gruesome killing. This is one of the versions of events that the two have given of that night, though it wouldn't be the last. It's December 4th, 1995, and the body of a young woman is found in a field near Joe Pool Lake in Dallas, Texas. Upon examination from the coroner, a few facts are established. First, she was shot at close range and endured blunt head trauma. Second, she's Adrianne Jones, a college-bound high school student who was last seen the night before. In the months following Adrianne's murder, police were stumped on who did it and why. They even questioned David since he knew her at the time, but because he had such a good reputation, didn't take him seriously as a suspect. 9 months went by, and it seemed that Adrianne's killers might have gotten away with it. Until they didn't. After killing Adrianne, David and Diane went back to their lives as promising young students. David went on to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and Zamora went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. They lived the normal lives of young people who socialized and made friends. Diane, however, decided to confide in 2 of her roommates about what she and her boyfriend had done. Horrified, they alerted the authorities at the academy, who, in turn, reached out to the Grand Prairie PD. After chasing dead leads for almost a year, they had 2 possible culprits in the murder of Adrianne Jones. Both David and Diane were brought in and faced over 30 hours of questioning. Initially, their versions of events matched. Both said that they had taken part in murdering Adrianne for sleeping with David, and they left her body in a field. Then, things began to change. David then said that he didn't participate in the murder at all, but helped cover up for his girlfriend. Diane now gave a similar story, saying that David did the killing and she simply didn't rat him out. The story of the alleged sexual encounter also came into question. Law enforcement now believes that David and Adrianne never slept together, as he had claimed. He reportedly told the authorities that he lied about sleeping with her to make his girlfriend jealous. This has especially horrified law enforcement and those who follow the case, as it makes Adrianne's eventual death especially pointless. But the Grand Prairie sergeant said that the murder was brutal and unnecessary. The claims put forward by David were untrue. Amazingly, the accused has also walked back on this retraction, saying that they did have sex, but that he claimed he lied following the advice of his lawyers. Investigations found that he didn't actually drive her home the night of the track meet, meaning they were either never intimate at all or it was at a different time. After David's house was searched, police found both the gun that was used in killing Adrianne and dumbbells that were apparently used to hit her in the head. In September 1996, The authorities announced that they were moving forward with charging David and Diane with capital murder. While Texas law states that they could pursue the death penalty, Adrianne's family did not want this. The trial was so high profile that NBC aired a direct-to-TV movie called Love's Deadly Triangle. Before it even began, too much controversy. Diane and David received separate trials, and while they seemed completely in love during the murder, they soon turned on each other. Diane paints David as a violent monster who killed Adrianne and kept her in fear, while David paints Diane as a violent killer who was the true killer. In Diane's trial, she claimed that she only made her confession after being pressured by the police and never intended to kill Adrianne. She said that she only wanted to confront her and get closure about whether or not her boyfriend had cheated. After about 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty of capital murder. Because her victim's family didn't seek the death penalty, she was given life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. She invoked her Fifth Amendment rights and chose not to testify at David's trial, where he was also found guilty of capital murder and eligible for parole after 40 years. Two promising kids who wanted to explore the skies and the stars would now spend their entire lives behind bars. In the years that David and Diane have been incarcerated, they have made some effort to carry on with their lives. Diane married a fellow inmate named Steve Mora in 2003, but the marriage ended in 2008. David, on his part, has enrolled in seminary school while in prison and hopes to become a preacher. Affairs can ruin relationships, families, and reputations, as we've seen in countless times in the past. But in the worst of cases, affairs can leave a trail of death and destruction in their paths. When people's feelings are on the line, some commit heinous crimes to keep the affection of those they love, including taking lives.